You better be listening to Sleazoids or I must break you.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Each week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Next week, just for you guys, we are breaking the rules. Going into the early 2000s, and they are absolutely banging films. Can't wait. So join the sleaze.
Absolutely. We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an honor shout out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we are in our 6th year of bonus episodes. There's like 130, 140 plus bonus episodes, as well as our bonus transmission series, which there's like 40 or 50 of now, where we talk about new release genre films, and there's a lot of them coming out. You might be there's new Evil Dead on the way. There's a new Ari Aster film on the way, so you might want to sign up. Patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast for those of you interested in that. And speaking of which, we did have a bunch of people make the jump this week. So
Beautiful.
Let's give them their shout outs here. We had Cole Goff. We had Aiden, Stacey Easton, Spencer Wilkie, Matthew Bird, Jesus02 at $5 a month. Thank you, Jesus. Tatiana Vaughn, Matt Ford, Severin Noax, Theodore Hanush, Darren Merlot. We're still going here. We had Justice SZ, who signed up for the annual tier, getting a whole year of the show in advance for a little bit of a discounted monthly rate, which you can do if you're interested. We had Calvin Kilby sign up, Ethan Sturgill, Lil Kissy, Drew Turlip, Flower, Atticus Townsend, Jonah Meadows, Special Agent Dale Cupo,
Awesome.
Dino Saris, Bren Andrews. You know, not a lot of people have been taking advantage of the fact that I have to say your name out loud on the show. We haven't had like a next level hitter, in a little while.
Ridiculous names. That's just for Josh to say.
But moderately cold, I'll take it. It's kind of funny. So thanks to Moderately Cold is the last guy who signed up there. Thanks to all of you folks for signing up. Hope you're enjoying those bonus episodes, and we appreciate the support.
Yes, thank you.
As always, the other plug for the week is Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you are listening on either one of those platforms, you can give us a good old rating and review down at the bottom of the app there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners, and we appreciate that support as well. And then the very last plug is merch. If you like the poster art that based out of Toronto horror artist Trevor Henderson did for the show, you can get that put on basically anything that you can think of. And you guys have thought of a lot of things. Hoodies, shirts, notebooks, pillows, just posters for your room or apartment. You can find that at the link in the description, as well as over at sleazoidspodcast.com. I was going to drop the Patreon again, but no, we have an official website too. It's a real show. You have to understand.
We got that grind set, baby.
That's right. But that is it for the intro. Welcome back to another week. As always, I am your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, is my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, everybody.
Welcome. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you folks, the free listeners, would have heard from us over on the main feed, and we would have had special returning guest Brianna Ziegler on the show to discuss aliens inside of human bodies, experiencing the highs and lows of mankind in a double feature of Nicholas Roeg's psychedelic and erotic The Man Who Fell to Earth, starring David Bowie from 1976, as well as John Carpenter's surprisingly tender attempt at sort of like a Hollywood romance road movie Spielberg-esque film called Starman from 1984, starring Jeff Bridges. And it basically is...
adorable Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, but kind of like what if E.T. was sexy and impregnated you is kind of like the vibe.
He gets shirtless, but a lot of the time also he's doing that little like twitchy bird thing that he's doing while he's trying to be an alien. It's great. It's good stuff.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I've definitely had the final shot of that film and that score in my head for the last like 2 weeks. So if you haven't heard that episode, go back and check it out. We had fun breaking those films down with Brianna. And then last week over on the Patreon feed exclusively for the patrons, we tackled a big one. As we mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a new Evil Dead movie on the way, and somehow we have made it this long without talking about Evil Dead or Sam Raimi. So we finally did it last week. We talked about, and we wanted to do it in a double feature that, wasn't just like, oh, we'll also do Evil Dead 2. Why not? That was too easy. So we found another lo-fi, do-it-yourself, demonic possession splatter film to pair it with. So we talked about, Sam Raimi's version, which is just very gleefully nasty and torturous. And we wanted to pair it with someone who was very inspired by him. So we talked about, alongside the Evil Dead, Shinichi Fukuzawa's more slapstick gore fest called Bloody Muscle Bodybuilder in Hell from the year 1995, a title that I couldn't stop saying on last week's episode. It's on the short list of just best titles I've ever heard. Yeah. And somehow he had less money and less crew than Raimi even had on his own film. It's basically like a one-man show. The guy who stars in it, he directed it, he wrote it, he did the special effects, all the gore makeup and everything. So it's very, very impressive to see what a guy could do on even somehow less money than The Evil Dead, which was not an expensive movie.
Yeah, and we hope that you guys really like the two films, or at least want us to talk about them, because I think the length of that episode is longer than the two films put together, so you're welcome for that.
We the first time ever we've broken our unwritten rule of making sure that the episode is shorter than the runtime of the films, which is something we try to stick to.
We were having too much fun.
There's a lot of interesting production history about the Evil Dead, so you know, come on, it's a lot of wonderful information in there. So if you haven't heard that episode, again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's bonus episode. But moving on to this week, and I actually did not mean to set this up in the way that I did, but we talked about Japanese gore last week, and I just had no idea what the films we were talking about this week even were. I didn't look them up. I should have looked them up, but I should have had some idea based on who we were having on. But moving on to this week, we are joined by a very special returning guest, I believe making his 5th appearance on the show. So definitely one of our most return to guests, specifically because he is notorious for bringing on the most fucked up shit that we talk about on this show. He kind of puts us in check anytime we hit a canon classic, we're like, no, we need to go back to the gutters for a little while, and I can always count on this guest to do that. He is an author, he's a filmmaker, he's made short films, he's written books, he's programmed films, so hopefully many of you are familiar with him and his work. That guest is Perry Ruhland. Perry, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming. Bringing the crazy.
Yeah, you're very reliable for us. Anytime I'm like, look, we have legitimately gone too long. Someone hasn't challenged us in a while. I'm just like, okay, it's time to call Perry.
I was thinking last year I was on. I felt kind of guilty because I brought on 2 classy movies. I brought on Verkmeister Harmonies and The Cremator, but in the years before that, I've usually brought on Japanese gore. I mean, my first show, I did Tetsuo 2 as the Japanese horror movie, and then Midori, and then Mermaid in a Manhole. And so to make up for last year,
people should go back and listen to those episodes, by the way, just because, like if you like industrial body horror or you want to see the most fucked up anime Uroguro film you've ever seen in your life, so much so that TikTok teens took the challenge to see who could dare one another to sit through it. Or you're interested in shot on video gore, Mermaid in a Manhole is maybe one of the grossest movies I've ever seen in my life until today. So, but until today is a nice note that will set Perry up to talk about what we're talking about this week.
I had to bring on 2 Japanese gore movies, one for this year, one to make up for last year. And I was looking through some of my favorites, and I realized that there are 2 incredible Japanese gore movies from 1988, both directed by some big names in Japanese horror and just Japanese scum cinema, both about snuff films. And those films are Evil Dead Trap by Toshihiro Ikeda and Celluloid Nightmares by the greatest director of all time, Hisayasu Sato.
Yeah, no, I am excited because I had somehow I kind of vaguely knew about Evil Dead Trap, but I really didn't know what it was. I think it did get marketed because they kind of pushed in the title that it had Evil Dead in the name. I was kind of like, oh, it's like one of the Evil Dead knockoffs, which is honestly not what the movie is at all. That was on my definitely list, of interest to me,
just because of the cinematographer, because we've covered 2 movies, I believe, that he's done.
Yes, actually, maybe even 3. Yeah, because he shot Tampopo, Lady Snowblood, and Serpent's Path by Kiyoshi Kurosawa. So I think those are the 3 that we've covered. So yes, very great cinematographer. So that I'm excited about, and this actually will be our second time talking about, and maybe Perry might have to correct me on his name again too. It's Hisayasu Sato.
Yeah, Sato or Sato. I have not heard it pronounced.
Not a filmmaker who gets talked about on broadcast reviews too often, or
unfortunately,
or in video interviews that I could find. He's kind of hard to find a lot of information about him, but we have talked about him once before in his film Splatter Naked Blood, and I was also interested too that both of these filmmakers were united in the fact that they both got started in the pinku genre as well in Japan, so straight up making softcore pornography and erotica, and basically taking the filmmaking style chops they learned making those very graphic, very erotic films. And both of them were like, what if we moved over into the world of like gory underground video and snuff film horror? So this double feature makes a lot of sense to me.
But still didn't get rid of the softcore porn. Let's go.
No, especially the second one. That was his whole career.
Yeah.
He's still making movies.
He's still making them,
Oh, that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah. So, but be warned up front to everyone, because on every Perry episode, I'm like, be warned, we're going to talk about some pretty disgusting things, but we are specifically going to be talking about filmmakers who were familiar with pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable, both in terms of gore and sexual content, making some very, very explicit horror films this week. So there's going to be some pretty vivid and disturbing descriptions going around on the show, but again, we have covered Splatter Naked Blood, so if anyone has heard that episode before, not much more ridiculous than what was going on there.
Or Mermaid in a Manhole. So,
but I got put in a really disturbing mindset this week, and even doing research, I wanted to watch a couple more Satos just to get a little bit more familiar, and I'm in a dark place right now, which is perfect mode. I'm ready to get into it. Let's kick things off here. Let's start things off with Evil Dead Trap. All right, we are talking Evil Dead Trap, aka Trap of the Dead Spirits, as it translates to. And it is the 1988 Japanese horror film directed by Toshiharu Ikeda. He is a Japanese filmmaker we're going to be talking about for the first time here. And I think this might even be my first film that I saw by him as well. I have not explored, although I've heard really good things about Mermaid Legend.
Yeah, that's a terrific movie.
I immediately watch listed it because it seemed like more of like a crime film. So
it's a supernatural revenge movie that has one of the craziest long take fight scenes I've ever seen, where like 30 people get stabbed with a spear.
Oh,
sold.
Cool.
Yeah, it's great.
Sold.
That's awesome.
But he is a Japanese filmmaker who, in doing some cursory research we found that he got into movies apparently in a drunken barroom bet that he could make a movie while he was to other students while he was at school, just like studying literature, and that was his origin story. He was like, this is it. I'm getting into movies, and he eventually joined the Nikkatsu Corporation, a corporation we've mentioned a couple times, which was most famous for their Roman pornos, which is sort of a name for the more sort of prestigious form of like pinku films, which is Japanese softcore pornography or erotica films. And on those sets for Nikkatsu, he apparently did everything from cleaning floors, like one of the characters in the next film that we'll be talking about, to shaving the pubic hairs off of actresses between shots, because Japan at the time had a law against showing pubic hair on screen and forced it to be blurred if it was seen, which also resulted in a lot of these filmmakers just keeping the underwear on, which is what we're going to also see a lot of in the second film. So anyone who watches this for the first time and is like, it's really weird that they get really, really explicit, but they just keep like licking each other's underpants. There is a reason for that.
Yeah, the rule seems to be, it's like, just as long as you don't show those genitals, you can do whatever you want to the underwear.
Well, and honestly, it was less the genitals than it was it legitimately was the pubic hair. Like that was more disturbing to them.
That's a funny thought.
So, but yeah, eventually Ikeda he worked his way up to directing a few of these pinku films himself, but had a little bit of a rocky relationship with the execs at Nikkatsu because he kept making his films a little bit too rough and a little bit too vulgar, especially in a couple of his films, one called Sex Hunter. One of them, he did one of the entries in the Angel Guts franchise, which is a horrible name.
Angel Guts, if I may jump in for a second.
Yeah,
is based on a manga series by Takashi Ishii, who also ended up writing the original screenplay for Evil Dead Trap, and is a great, really undersung Japanese exploitation filmmaker. Not only did his manga kind of kickstart a whole wave of like neo Iroguro in the late 70s, he directed the movie Gonin, the Japanese crime film with Takeshi Kitano, which is one of the most like Sleazoids core crime movies I've ever seen. If you're listening to this and you like slick, violent, nasty stuff, which hopefully given the show you do, do yourself a favor and watch Gonin.
Hell awesome. Yeah.
I think I just added that to my watch list. Actually.
Beautiful, beautiful man. It has a new movie coming out this year that I'm super excited about. Can't wait.
Oh, awesome.
But so that was what Ikeda got doing. He's making, pinku films for the Nikkatsu company, but eventually the creative differences became too strong between the two, and it saw him parting ways to pursue directing straight up genre movies, which we talked about in one of his films, Mermaid Legend, which was more of sort of like a supernatural thriller, sort of revenge film. And then for whatever reason, since apparently he's not particularly fond of horror films, from what I could find about the guy, he took on directing duty for Evil Dead Trap. Now, Perry, is this because of his relationship to the writer that you were just mentioning?
I'm not 100% sure, but it certainly wouldn't hurt. He had again adapted Takashi Ishii before with Angel Guts Red Porno, and then with Evil Dead Trap, we'll talk about this more when it comes to like the actual movie. But a lot of it feels like a director just kind of getting a chance to flex his muscles. Just kind of shoot whatever he wants, So I assume he got some level of slack before he signed on.
Yeah, well, and from what I could find is that this is typically by a lot of people considered to be one of Japan's earliest splatter films, essentially. Yeah. So, very interesting that you kind of came into this genre sideways, maybe not particularly interested in it, and basically made one of your country's like foremost movies in a genre.
And to see so many, at least for us, obvious influences of other huge filmmakers that we cover, like Argento, Raimi, and then him to say that he's never even seen those films. It's like, wow. I don't know if like I can totally believe you. There's just some things here that seem. I was gonna
say with the Raimi one, I don't think that's impossible. Mostly just because it wouldn't be the first time we've talked about on the show a movie producer naming a movie to cash in on the popularity of another one, like without having anything to do with the film. Like Fulci's Zombie 2 immediately comes to mind. Like not a sequel to Dawn of the Dead, probably made some extra money marketed as one, and I could see people being like, well, it's kind of a horror. It's kind of a splatter films. I don't know. Call it Japanese Evil Dead, the same way that they did with the Bodybuilder in Hell, which is the same thing. They literally just called it the Japanese Evil Dead as like the subtitle.
Yeah, it's just wild to also see these close up, knife to eyeball shots where it's just gooping out and slicing, and you're like, well, that's straight up Fulci.
Oh, I don't believe him that he's not seen a Fulci movie. That's for sure.
No, the Italian horror influence is all over this. Even the soundtrack is kind of like.
Yeah, totally.
You got the prog rock goblin.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, for anyone who hasn't seen Evil Dead Trap, the loose log line here is that it is about a late night talk show hostess named Namie, who basically regularly takes home movie tape submissions on her show that's broadcasted for the quote unquote those who can't sleep. Which is like a really great detail that she, it puts her in the same realm for me as James Woods in Videodrome. She's specifically programming the freaky late night content.
Yeah,
and one day she receives.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
I won't spoil it. It's essentially just the scene that comes up after the.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say So one day that she receives
that. So.
Yeah, what she believes to be a snuff film, which is the murder of a woman, and it's sourced back to an abandoned military base that they can kind of see directions via the tape itself. And she decides to take a camera crew out to investigate it, and essentially gets her crew kind of killed off one by one, in very giallo or slasher-esque fashion, but definitely made by a filmmaker who was familiar with extreme and hardcore elements of the medium, and basically saw his chance to apply his unique skills and sensibility to this type of movie.
Yeah, I want to mention also her camera crew. It's explicitly like one of the last all-women teams.
Yes, other than the one guy they bring.
Yeah, they bring a one guy as like the assistant director. But yeah, it's like another giallo influences of like these beautiful clothes that they're all wearing throughout the shoot. Like Namie is wearing this like amazing red suit the whole time, and there's a lot of detail in like their fashion presentation. It just looks great. But yeah, they get to this military base, which is like almost like a Texas Chainsaw style abject zone where people just kind of wander in and get killed. Yeah. And they just start poking around, and basically in no time, someone starts getting whacked off.
Which by the way, like they went there to being like, well, a snuff film was just made in this place. And it seems pretty expected to me that maybe like the killer might still be hanging out there.
Yeah, what's even scarier too is having Nami look at the tape that they eventually follow for directions, like as they're going. Yeah,
that's
on
one of my
highway.
favorite details.
Yeah, it's amazing. They have a shot where the camera actually pans from the VHS that they're watching, and it pans up to the windshield, and it's matching the exact same signs that they're seeing, so they're en route. And it's just it kind of gives you that feeling of like repetition, like they're en route to die, essentially.
Yeah. And also I gotta say, like the uniting factor between these two is obviously the sort of the snuff film and the sort of videotape horror element that's happening here. And I gotta say, I'm really drawn to those images. Like just early on, like the first stuff, just like the static texture and the smeary kind of hazy noise of the whole thing, like that opening from the perspective of the killer watching her on a CRT television, and the close-ups that almost appear to take place in like this desaturated, static netherworld, and her eventually watching that snuff film. But it kind of like lit really nicely and framed in the point of view shot from like the knife's perspective as it starts going into a woman's flesh and poking her eyeball until it leaks everywhere, which is the most Fulci-esque detail and
viscous
just
fluid.
Disgusting. Yep.
It's long.
Pops it like an egg yolk. Horrifying.
Yeah,
there was a lot of like. Oh, sorry. Go on.
It was a real simple thing. It was when we were watching it, was me and my brother watched it, and he's never seen a Fulci film. So when he watched that, he was like, he had a visceral reaction. He saw nothing like that before, and it was something else, because it is long and detailed. Like, he doesn't just show the knife going into the eye and the goop coming out, but then he starts slicing upward as well, and it's just the attention to detail is excruciating.
Yeah. And I was just going to say, not only is there like all the CRT and video stuff at the start, like throughout this big concrete labyrinth that they find themselves in, there are all these CRT screens, and they really capture, like, I don't know, the texture of the technology, the way the light plays off the actors' faces. There are a couple of great shots where it's like match cuts. I mean, you mentioned the earlier one that's the pan up from the TV to the screen, but there's one where they find this water tower on this abandoned military base. It's a match cut from the shot of it on the video to the shot in the film, and you can just see the difference in the textures between these mediums. Like, he really knew how to use video for its unique effects, not just for like a cheaper version of film.
Definitely.
Yeah, well, and I really like that a lot. What a lot of the format switching does is I think it does create this kind of distance for the characters who are like, well, that exists in like a video. Like in the next film, we'll talk about. There's one character who's like, well, that's on video. That's fake. Like, it doesn't. That's not real. It doesn't make sense. And there is something to be. Yeah, and there is something to be said about like using that imagery in a really disorienting fashion to then pull you out and go back into the film where you're about to watch stuff that's basically just as disgusting. And it is worth noting that like the gore in this is wild. Like, we've talked about a lot of gory films in this. It's really, really violent, and like the opening seconds you have Fulci eye horror. Like, Fulci usually waited a couple minutes into the movie before he
like 2 minutes into this movie or something like that.
Yeah, but before he starts like shoving a woman's head into like a giant wooden splinter for an entire minute, you know, he took his time to get there, and it did kind of remind me of what Perry has paired it with the Sato film we've talked about, Splatter Naked Blood, which had some similarly, you know, to the point, very extreme moments. Like, I think about that scene of that girl deep frying herself and eating herself, or cutting off her labia and eating it. It's just like really horrifying images. So that's the realm that we're going to be talking about in this. But also what's interesting is that he kind of does put it into a little bit more of like a pop horror sort of sensibility. Like, Perry was talking a little bit about Texas Chainsaw. We've been talking, you know, people have been making some kind of Argento comparisons as well. So there is some stuff that I found kind of left me unprepared for just how disreputable this film was going to get. And not to say that like Texas Chainsaw is like the most reputable film or anything either, but it's just, you know, it is one of those things where I went, oh, you know, like it's speaking in the vocabulary, especially in the late 80s, of, you know, commercial slasher films in some ways, or Italian horror films that have like actually made it over, and people just love the colors and love the music. And then you just get, you know, really, really genuinely shocking and off-putting and really upsetting violence in a way that, you know, might, I think even for gore hounds, might have a pretty cool effect on them.
Yeah. And some of it comes off like some of the violence is so over the top and like stretched out in a sense to show you everything. It almost seems, and by the end it could be argued, I guess it could be, but it's like almost supernatural the way some of these people die, even though they're mixing it in with a very physical like slasher element, like being stabbed by poles, but they're coming out from the ground for some reason. And then there's stuff like
that was the part that was the only part that made me think of Raimi, because we had just watched Evil Dead, and I was thinking about the tree, and I was thinking about, you know, like the way that
almost.
Yeah, like the way that those poles move and like the way that they like pierce her, and they don't just feel like someone pushed them through. They kind of keep moving. They do have like a tentacle like effect to them, because that's the very first kill, is this woman just getting, impaled by a bunch of giant spikes that come out of the walls and the floors out of nowhere, and just like hold her in a place where they can like display her.
Yeah, the camera afterwards, after you see every single detail of her getting impaled, he's still like, now look at the still body.
Here's a beautiful slow seconds. Dolly out as, we see her as like this art piece.
It is very fluid movement with the camera and everything. Like he's really trying to display it.
Basically, later in the film you learn that there is like literally two killers, but for most of the movie there are like two killers where there's a guy who is the only other link to the military base theme in it. Is the killer is wearing like a camo jumpsuit basically and like a black leather cloak, and he's doing like slasher kills on people. Yeah, it's like a poncho, and he's doing like slasher kills on people. He's choking people out with wire, or he's like tying someone up and putting a trap for them. But the other half is this like very I kept thinking of Argento's Inferno when I watch it. Where
exactly,
it's like
that was the movie I thought itself, of the most too.
Yeah,
the building itself is malevolent, and especially the sequence you're talking about here. It has this odd dream logic to it, where it's the sequence where the woman Ray, I believe, she has sex with the one guy they bring along. The one guy leaves, and then she is like going through a series of doors to different rooms, and all of them have these very, let's say, charged images to them. Like she's fully clothed in these industrial showers, and then a door opens, she goes through, and there is a bunch of maggots like leaking from the ceiling, like the scene in Suspiria. There's a bit where she encounters like a snake, and all these like uncomfortable sexual signifiers that come without any logical coherence, but the film develops a coherence through like a sustained emotion, basically. Where
there's a very slow build creep factor to it, right? Where she's just like walking by a rusty piece of barbed wire, or finding a dead animal, or it has a little bit of a, and then seeing the mysterious man who's just looking for someone and telling them that this isn't a playground. Meanwhile, they are deciding to have full-on softcore sex scenes in the dirty factory.
Right. By the time she reaches the end of that hallway, though, of all these like increasingly sexually charged images, and then she's murdered by out of nowhere like industrial piping impaling her. It's like nonsensical visually, but it kind of gets you in the gut. It's just very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And in a similar way to the trees in Evil Dead.
Yeah, totally. I also like we were talking about the contrast between the VHS footage and the film itself. And just one example I wanted to bring up is when they're actually approaching the facility, and he does this like kind of floating camera move that reminded me almost of something that would be in Angst or something like that. And I just wanted to say I just love those contrasts, because that seemed like a very it's like a prestigious kind of crane shot or something, and then you dive into something like his impalement, or the more, I guess, or something that is kind of straight out of Evil Dead, is that POV shot he does with what turns out to be the brother or whatever, and it's this kind of like creature that really moves very quickly and has this kind of
he flies around manically.
And that's straight out of Evil Dead, it seemed.
The POV shots are, but that last bit at the end where there's like a POV of the creature and it's like flying around, whipping back and forth, that sequence, and maybe the POV sequences earlier, but definitely that one, I believe were done by the great Takashi Ito, who is a Japanese experimental filmmaker who... This is the only horror movie he's worked on. He worked on a couple of... he worked on like a Kaizo Hayashi movie. He's worked on some other things. But it's fascinating that you have like a guy from... the heir to Toshio Matsumoto as like one of the great Japanese avant-garde filmmakers doing special effects sequences for this really disreputable, sleazy horror film.
Yeah. No, I mean, like, and that's kind of like the realm that the film operates in. It feels very visually accomplished. All of the things that it's pulling from, like the fact that we're comparing it to Hooper and Raimi and Fulci and Argento. Like he seems like stylistically, it seems like he has a depth of, understanding the visuals of horror, the way he shoots the voyeuristic elements of it. And, even just like a simple shot like that insanely creepy reveal of the two girls talking about heading back because they're getting freaked out. And it's framed on like this windowsill where we can see like one of the imprisoned men's hand reach out only for it to get stomped on by the man in a mask and a poncho in the foreground of the shot as the two girls are there, like being spied on. I also wanted to mention this because the score definitely goes full Goblin prog rock, especially when it gets into the more sort of Inferno-esque, she's in the killer's lair. The building itself almost looks like it's kind of alive and on fire, and it's almost raining inside too. Like all of that kind of stuff is really amazing. The score early on, there's this very twinkling synth that it has.
Yeah.
And I was so distracted by the fact that it almost has the same melody as the German Eurodance song All Around the World. the la 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 la's. And I was like, oh man, I this is 2 weeks in a row where I've had like weird song connections just kind of come into my head awesome. While watching it. Not necessarily the vibe I was expecting, but there's also kind of like these piercing flute sounds. It has a very dynamic score actually for like what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of goes all over the place, which is, I guess, what we said earlier, a little bit similar to Argento, where he'll have things in placement that you're like, I would have never thought to put it there, but somehow it's giving this kind of different, I don't know, energy or something with the scene. There's something contradicting, but it almost makes it more, I don't know. It's just...
Yeah,
I don't know.
I felt that about the unpredictability of the images as well, like the constant use of exaggerated low and high angles. And there's one shot that really freaked me out when I watched it, which was when the two girls are going back to the van, and it's shot from the point of view, and it ends up being kind of like a little bit of a red herring scare or a jump scare or something like that. But like the shot of the girls going back to the van is actually someone inside the van watching the eyeball snuff tape. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, when it hears the girls, the camera lurches to be like, oh my God, the girls are here. And my first thought was, holy fuck, like, who is this guy? Why are we in this? Like, what? where did this guy? And it ends up being just, one of the guys like snuck in or whatever.
Condo.
And he wanted to. Yeah.
Which is funny, too, because they brought him for security and he spends the entire time just scaring the shit out of them.
Yeah, he just fucks around. He has sex. He pulls pranks. And then he gets decapitated off screen at some point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I will say, it really is a case where there's a movie where I'd say there are like no boring or regular or like easy shots. But they're also, it's not show-offy either. I mean, there's a long take in this movie that's pretty incredible, but it's also very subtle. I think one of the movie's biggest problems is there's a lot of like exposition dump stuff near the end, and one of them is delivered by a guy talking to a character in the sewer, and he's talking to her, and I watched this with my friend, and we got like 2 minutes into him like warning her and them having a conversation. He's like, hey, the camera's still rolling, and it's like going back and forth and moving with them, and it's very...
Yeah, they were like, this is the one dialogue connection scene, so why don't I like actually not discombobulate you for it?
It's very assured filmmaking.
Yeah.
Yes.
He knows what he's doing.
Yeah, and so much mileage out of the mood and of the
location
of these like shot choices, even just small things like the camera flashing for photography to get the strobe effect that they do at one point is amazing, or that insanely crazy dolly zoom on the harshly lit like moonlight blue hallway as like all of the girls go to one end of the hallway. The first girl who got impaled was dead, and all of a sudden down the hallway this dolly zoom occurs in like a Dutch angle while something is sliding towards them, and you can hear the scratching noises because it's a meat hook sliding on a rail. And speaking of Texas Chainsaw, and the girl is literally sliding towards them and like slams into the wall behind them. And even when you're like, it's a shocking image, but then you also get details that like immediately one of the girls just like vomits almost all over the camera and stuff. It's just a filthy movie in that that way, but so dynamically shot.
Yeah, and pretty much right after that too, you have first you have the setup of the girl using the camera for just kind of seeing in these dark rooms, and then I think Kondo does a prank on her. But that's an awesome setup for what happens later when she loses the camera, and then she starts seeing those flashes follow her from behind, and she knows that the killer is behind her.
So good.
Then it turns into that thing you were talking about too, where it kind of does the kind of stutter effect as the killer is going after her. So it's just, there's these layers to it that kind of all add to that moment, and it's very cool.
And there's that one incredible shot where it is like a classic suspense sequence where Nami hears that one of her coworkers is like, she's begging for help for a television. And then Nami goes to this door where she's hearing her from, and we see a shot behind the door, which is a long take from the doorknob and a wire attached to it, all the way around this wire, and then you see the wires leading to a crossbow, and it's wrapped around the trigger, and it's this set piece of like, oh, if she opens the door, the crossbow's gonna fire, and her coworker's gagged and can't warm her. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, and what's wild too about that is the it's kind of a saw trap where it's almost like if they figure it out, maybe they won't kill their friend or whatever. And even after she opens it and the thing misses, it's almost honestly with this killer, it seems like that was on purpose just to fuck with them even more. But then she trips a wire and this giant machete just comes swooping down from the ceiling and crushes right into half of her side of her face. It's
just embeds in her face.
And again, oh my god, the way her eyes roll and the blood gushes and like her flesh almost starts to like peel off. Disgusting.
It's insane.
There's this awful detail where she's like gagged when the crossbow's aiming at her, but when the machete comes through, it cuts the strap and you just see like her mouth go slack and the gag just roll out.
And he cuts back like movie. 3 or 4 times, and every single time he cuts back, there's just more blood coming out of her eyes, more blood coming out of her mouth.
I mean, that was something that not the explicitness of the gore, but it was something that did remind me of Texas Chainsaw. But it's because of just like the sustained unbearability of it is kind of what it feels like. Like as soon as it kickstarts into a series of chases that are the killer sometimes tracking them into the vehicles or into rooms and going after them, it really is just constant screaming and confusion and falling deeper into this property that, as Perry put it, almost feels sort of malevolent in and of itself. Like there's a part where they literally just fall down stairs that like swallow them, like they just break through when they collapse
into darkness.
The next time we see them is they're on the roof. Like she falls down a stairwell to a lower level and then wakes up unconscious on the roof and like the moon's shining down.
Yeah, it feels like
the setting.
It's crazy.
The setting is one of my favorites in any horror movie I've seen, honestly. It's so bizarre. Like it feels like something from a video game. This weird liminal feeling, if I may use the word, where it's just these endless concrete hallways. And they had a purpose at one time. It's an abandoned military base, which is just such a loaded concept for a slasher location. Yeah. But there's no real relics of like weaponry or garage, just like completely hollowed out.
Yeah.
And all that's left is just this brutal concrete maze.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah, it was definitely. There were parts that reminded me of Silent Hill and like Resident Evil a little bit, like some of the best parts.
Yeah, definitely. There was this, I remember a feeling when it's a moment when I believe it's Raya. I think she's in the pink, and she breaks free from everybody because she discovers something and gets really freaked out, and actually finds an exit. And I remember thinking when she got out, going from the inside the factory or wherever they are at that point. When she gets outside, there was like this moment of relief for me, honestly, like it was, you were out of the labyrinth a little bit. And she even gets to the car and gets to the gate. And, it's obvious in this kind of movie, nothing good is going to happen, but there's this like little moment of hope with it. And there is relief to being outside and not in this like hellish labyrinth.
And then she gets like one of the worst deaths of anybody.
Unfortunately, yes, she absolutely does, which has honestly one of the like the impalement scene, the visualization of it is crazy. Like what happens to her is she gets a wire around her neck and she's pretty much pulled up.
Well, I mean, you're going to mention what happens to her before that as well.
Well, yeah. I guess I was talking about specifically the murder, but yeah, what does happen is she gets through to the gate, and there's this awesome shot actually where she gets out of the car, has to open up the gate, and then when she gets back, one of I think it's the guy that they see earlier that gets the hand stomped, correct?
Yes.
And I guess he's kind of been like taken prisoner, it seems, and it seems that he's gone a bad way, we'll say, because
because apparently he will get released if he stops them
right.
in some capacity. Like if he right. basically acts as sort of like an alarm dog to go and stop the women from escaping when the killer isn't there to actually stop them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
which he chooses a very specific route in which he becomes a really horrible rapist.
Yes. Yeah. And then he gets killed himself during that whole thing, and at first you think maybe like one of them has come back and at the last second,
one of the girls,
someone is helping her, but no, then the moment she gets out and has this moment of relief, it's like this really dark sequence because it's at nighttime this time, and it's a shot from behind the van, but you get a side profile of her, and as she's just basically getting pulled up over the van's roof and over the top of it to the bottom, and just hits the concrete and breaks her neck, and you see the entire thing from one side to the other. And
my favorite shot is that POV shot of like her perspective as the wire noose literally like basically looks like it's gonna drop down on top of the camera, as if we are watching it as if it was going around our own neck before it gets yanked, and it literally pulls her over top of a fucking vehicle. And like that's how strong it is.
There's something about that too, that it's like the length of the wire and the strength that would require for someone to pull at like that much a human being over a giant van. Yeah, it just feels supernatural. And even in the shot, because it's a thin wire that's doing it to her, it almost looks like there's no wire, so it just looks like there's like a ghost choking her over the van, and it's a great shot. I absolutely loved it, but very scary.
Again, double relief to pull it too, like so much subversion to be like, oh, she's the one who escaped, she made it to the car, yay. But then she's getting saved. Very, very violently assaulted, and then you're like, oh, well, that guy now got, he gets something like pushed through the back of his head, basically.
He gets shot with a crossbow.
Oh, with the crossbow, and it gushes blood all over her while he's on top of her. And then there's a little bit of relief to, okay, now she's going to escape. She's going to get out again. And then the wire, just every little tiny bit of hope you have, it's like, no, there is some supernatural death machine coming to get these people.
Yep, absolutely.
And we should mention throughout this chunk of the movie, there's a stranger that shows up who's like, hey, you shouldn't be here. And he's like friendly, but he's very suspicious from the start. Like he's always disappearing when someone gets murdered. And like, if you've seen one of these, you know that he's going to be at least a bad guy. But he talks about how he lives here with his brother. And after everyone's picked off, he gives Nami a way to escape. And as she's going to escape, she notices the killer grabbing all the bodies from behind the van and dragging them back to his lair. And she has this moment of like, she could escape or she could figure out the mystery she came here to. And that the pull of like morbid curiosity is what keeps her there. And then she discovers
that was the most survival
truth.
Horror video game scene for me in the film, where she just straight up like that suspense moment when she comes across the corpses near the van. And, she's holding the gun, she's hiding there while the masked killer is just dragging these bodies into a field. And it's like she could get in the car, she could go get help, she could do something. But the way the camera moves around the van, and you can almost feel the gravitational pull towards, that's an intriguing image. What he's doing. Maybe I should go see what he's doing. And it leads into that colorful basement layer / like shrine with all of her videotape footage, because this person, we get a little bit of voiceover in that opening shot when the killer is watching her on TV that she kind of looks like their mother, is kind of the implication that they might be targeting her for that reason. But all the imagery of like the hospital beds with corpses, or like the strange, like what look like almost anatomical paintings that are like on the wall and
they're
stuff.
Like the Da Vinci anatomical sketches.
Yes. And I was like the just a feat of production design, this like layer that this killer has in it. I don't know. There's something like, definitely I got like a little bit of that Inferno, specifically because what I've always loved about that is that it basically does just strip Argento down into nothing but the surreal, atmospheric, disorienting, sort of like nightmare elements, just like all otherworldly colored light shows and slow burn anticipation of the bodily harm that's going to come to these characters. But in that film, it's like loosely strung together by evil Art Deco building. And in here you have like just like this weird sort of monster layer that accompanies the like prog rock, like choir-esque, sort of soundtrack that it has at this point. And yeah, this is the most where I was like, horror video game straight up. That was the first thing my mind went to. And it's also the kind of thing where I would go, it's always been my problem with horror video games, which is that I'd the opposite. I'd be like, no, I'm leaving this building. My character can walk out. I'm walking that way. And she just keeps watching. The voyeurism element kind of comes in. She's so intrigued. Like that long shot even of him continuing to drag the corpses into the beds. And she's like in his little bedroom and it's two completely different lit rooms. And she's almost like peeking through the doorway, kind of getting a glimpse of what he's doing. It's horrifying.
And as he grabs one of the corpse's hands, it literally falls off from just like decay.
It's a great reversal because the start of the movie is him and his brother, who we'll talk about shortly, are like projecting onto her. They're watching her on screens and being like, oh, she just looks like his mother. And by the way, if a movie opens with someone watching someone on a screen and then has a sequence where someone's eye gets cut open, like, the director's up to some shit. Because then you have her, like, stalking him into his house. And it's this weird, like, this domestic scene where you have all these pictures of these two brothers, one of which has a bunch of pins through his face. And, then you finally get the reveal that the guy in camo has been the nice guy the whole time. But there's no sign of his brother at the moment.
He's hiding.
Well, I mean, like those surreal aspects get launched into another gear when we find out that the killer is a fucking little fetus monster that fucking
he's like
lives
inside ghoul.
Straight up, like basket case brain damage. I was scribbling those down when I was like, what the fuck is happening?
He only really sprinkles it out like a tiny bit throughout the movie. Like you have those POVs that we were talking about that are kind of fast paced and have these like high hisses. And then I think at the very beginning, there's kind of like a higher pitched voice that says something like mother or something like that. But then just because of everything that happens in this, you don't think about it as much. And so when there is this kind of crazy, very, I guess, Argento reveal, or would this be more Fulci or Argento? I feel like it's a mix almost.
I feel like it's kind of at its own realm at this point. I mean, I definitely like Lauder, but
definitely,
it's just very strange. It really comes out of nowhere. I mean,
honestly, the closest thing I thought about recently was Malignant. Where all of a sudden it has that reveal in the third act where all of a sudden there's a fucking little monster inside the body and it basically operates like a face hugger from Alien. And it's like, I'm going to jump the fuck out of here. And creature effects apparently done by a dude who would go on to do some like 90s Godzilla suits.
Cool.
Nice.
So like it does have like a, like a texture and a slime to it. And really it makes those crazy sort of shots that didn't make sense earlier with the wild Dutch angles and crazy sort of flying camera maneuvers. Like they make sense because they are from the perspective of this creature. So the two brothers together have been stacking the body count and doing the pretty amazingly orchestrated kills that they do. I actually just realized looking at my notes here, I forgot one shot we forgot to mention that kind of blew my mind was after her friend gets killed in that one sequence where the machete like goes into the side of her head. I forgot to mention that part where it's like a dolly shot where she's being chased by like fireworks and shit. And I was like, am I supposed to, is the little creature brother like lighting these off? What?
It's like
if it was like a supernatural thing, or at one point I thought because of the mix of like the wires dangling and the water and the fire that like explosions were just going off, but then it started happening in the hallway, and I was like, this is just wild. I don't.
But that's also an important moment because it reveals that they don't want to kill her either, right? Because she's like their mom or whatever. So like when they crossbow her, they just like pin her to the wall and force her to like rip herself out of her clothes in order to get out of it, practically.
Yeah.
Very, very Oedipal. It only gets more so later on.
Oh my god, shit. I mean, like this whole finale is fucking crazy.
I love
this
that.
is like 20 minutes, by the way. It's really long because there's dialogue in between each stretch, basically.
And it goes
it has...
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to...
It just has this, like... While most of the movie is kind of a sustained intensity, this one is like... It feels like it's about to be over. And then something really bad happens again. It's a bunch of like false awakenings, basically. Where it's like, all right, we're out of the clear now. And then, nope. And usually that stuff kind of pisses me off, but it's pretty scary in this one.
It does a decent evolution. It does kind of take like 5 different of your favorite horror film endings and then just keep piling it on. Like you have you have a battle of like one-on-one where it's the like charred body versus Nami, which I guess you could say is like a final girl kind of moment. You have the creature versus her. You actually have the creature burst out of her at the end and stuff. Like there's just so many different layers to all of the action and I guess horror elements of the ending.
I love the look of that finale though. The fiery haze and like the wet texture of everything like just makes it feel so it just feels so like otherworldly, but still, you know, like dangerous in a tangible way that the character is kind of reckoning with. And, you know, obviously revealing, you know, that this creature has been flying around and can do some damage. And when it goes full on, like it's not hiding anymore. Like there's that one moment that I think, Perry, you were mentioning this is by the experimental filmmaker, right? But like that bullet time capture setup that it does, which is basically like the same 360-degree stills capture setup that they did for The Matrix, but like it's of Naomi sitting in the middle of the room holding her gun as the, you know, the little creature starts like flying around and trying to attack her and get inside of her. And, you know, at one point, straight up Resident Evil style, starts using a giant tongue to like strangle her and shit like that.
That's an umbilical cord.
Right.
Well, that's the umbilical cord. Yeah. Oh my god. But yeah, like it feels like it. I don't know. There's like a weird biology to this movie and this building in a way. Cause like even the overgrown vegetation inside, it almost looks like veins and stuff like that. There's just something about the way that this looks. This movie literally has everything.
Yeah.
It even has the brother trying to like regretfully put the fetus back inside of him so that he can like stab himself to death. And then I think that's when she lights him on fire to kill both of them. And then he turns into the charred zombie and is still going.
The fetus puppeteers the charred corpse.
Yes.
It's
which was almost Dr. Freudenstein is what I was thinking of when he comes back as the charred fucking corpse and just how inescapable and grisly this whole like nightmare situation is. And, you know, she eventually has to like that image of her pushing him out the window and him shattering into ashy pieces all over the exterior. What a great shot.
Oh, I love the detail too. This one is just unnecessary, but very cool. Cause at one point the charred zombie version chokes her. And she comes out, and as she's like looking over the kind of more calm location now because everything's over, she peels off like the charred skin off of her neck, which is just an awesome detail and shot at the very end. And I also like that he does this, like we've already talked about, probably 4 fake outs, and then he does an extra long one, like where she even goes back to work and all of that, and then gets a package and
she fucking sells the event to the television, which I thought was so dark because I mean like the original idea is all female crew going to investigate this like gruesome snuff tape, and the male producer basically letting them do it, being like, I don't care if it gets ratings, you know, whatever,
just find
go do it.
proof.
I don't know. Yeah, and then the way that she comes back and she wakes up, and there is almost like an Italian giallo detective being like, "We could not find the the fetus." You know, we don't know what you're talking about.
So
and she sells it to, you know, she did find a great story. All her friends died. And I think it's one of the crew members comes back to her and hands her a napkin saying that some man left it for her, that she forgot something. And it is just the brother's lighter from earlier in the film, which there is that great shot of him lighting his lighter, revealing the decapitated head on the ground. I thought that was great. So like the lighter is actually kind of an important image. And then she knows immediately what it means, that like the little fetus monster brother is kind of still out there. And not only is he out there, he is literally in her fucking womb and pops out of her, and he's screaming, "Mama!"
he pops out through her stomach, like it's like a horrifying, like inflating effect, and then like a pop of gore, and this like giant fucking animatronic is popping out, screaming at the protagonist.
And then fading into that negative film effect that it does while she screams. Oh my God, what an image.
The image goes negative and then roll credits, and that's it.
Yeah.
Yep. Just her screams, and that's it.
As he yells mama and mommy.
I want to mention at this point, there's an Evil Dead Trap 2 that's only loosely connected to Evil Dead Trap 1. And I think this is the better film, but I should mention Evil Dead Trap 2 is even nuttier.
Oh,
like it goes to stranger and more gruesome directions than this one. So
I did see it has decent reviews, so I definitely gotta check it out.
Who did that one?
Izo Hashimoto. The only other movie he did of that, I mean, I say of note, but like real sickos. This movie Lucky Sky Diamond.
I recognize that name.
He did a Lucky Sky Diamond, which is like a horror movie comedy that was sold as a guinea pig movie, even though it wasn't.
It looks like he also co-wrote Akira. Maybe that's why I've heard of him.
You know, that would do it.
Well, that's why. That's quite the credit right there.
Yeah, well, I'm intrigued. I mean, I really liked this movie, and if we are pivoting towards reductive rating round, this was like a very solid to maybe even a high 4 for me, because I couldn't believe what I was watching by the end of the film. And early on, like there was a confidence to it, and I really enjoyed it. But just the way that it kept building and remixing so much horror that I love, like doing Japanese horror, doing slashers, doing Argento and Fulci and Hooper, and getting some like Henenlotter and Alien. And I was like, how many different things can this guy do, despite saying that he's not a fan of the horror genre, nor has he seen many horror films? And I was like, I don't know, man. I mean, he's really good at all of them if he hadn't. And I don't know. I really loved this. Like, I thought it was so just unpredictable and genuinely unsettling. And again, very dreamy and nightmarish, but not sacrificing any of just the really horrifying sort of tangibility of the whole thing. The production design of this fucking building and how just filthy and colorful it is at the same time, and the eeriness of it, the fact that it has long stretches that remind you of, you know, the sort of inescapable and kind of unbearable feeling I get when I play survival horror video games. Like, it has all of this stuff, as well as, if you're a fan of it, like the prog rock soundtrack, the insanely gory Fulci-esque kills. Like, if you're a fan of any kind of horror, I think you're represented in some way by this film that is basically like, 100 minutes long and has some of the most insane voyeuristic murder sequences I've probably ever seen in a film. So I don't know. I was kind of blown away by this, and that I hadn't, you know, I'd heard of it, but I'm surprised I haven't heard more. I'm going to have to maybe go back to this at some point, because this was really, really good. Yeah,
I'm right there with you. I think this is awesome. I'm also giving it a 4. He's incredible at building suspense. Like the sequence before, I believe it's Rye gets the impalement kill is actually incredible. Like, there's all these she's starting to hear noises around the area, and they do this awesome like side pan where she's center, but the windows that are showing like light coming from the outside are really overtaking a lot of the shot, and in the background it's just a really beautiful and kind of creepy image. And it leads into this like dark room where Kondo ends up scaring her, and before that there's this like rumbling that he's doing in the closet and before he scares her, and it's just, I don't know, he's very good at suspense building. And then when he does get to the gore, he does not hold back whatsoever. ever. This is some of the
the payoff is fucking crazy.
Yeah, this is some of the wildest shit I've seen in a little bit. And like if you've seen Fulci, you've definitely seen something like the first 3 minutes, the eye impalement or whatever. But it's still really disgusting, and he does find his own way of doing it.
But Fulci never did saw traps.
Yeah,
you know?
Yep.
You know?
Oh yeah, and he's got the fake out with that saw trap too. Like he just has to add insult to injury constantly in these kills. And there's just something about him saying that he wasn't a fan of horror just seems so crazy because he's just so good at it, and he obviously has an understanding of it. And this is surprisingly a kind of a beautiful looking film when it's not doing the VHS stuff, which is also awesome. But Tamara he popped off again. Like I love the look of his movies. Specifically, this one reminded me most with Serpent's Path, probably because they also have a similar setting, if I remember correctly, where it's kind of in like a factory in an open warehouse and that kind of thing. So
it also has the tape aspect to it as well, a little bit as well.
Yeah, totally. And he kind of utilizes like long shots, and I'm sure that was partly the director too. But regardless, it's great work.
Do you know what you've just sold me? Serpent's Path meets Inferno.
Yeah,
I'm going. I'm going critic mode on it.
That's awesome. I don't have much to add. Oh, I did like just a moment in the movie I didn't mention was when she is at the van before she sees the killer come up and then drag the bodies away. She's kind of reminiscing about her friends, and individually she's saying like, Rye had a date. She was right. We should have went back. Like all of this. So she's feeling guilt, but then you kind of get that more seedy ending where she's using the whole event to still spring her career. So I like that there's some complications there and some nuance. So 4 out of 5.
And immediately driven by curiosity, like she could go and get help. She's like, she was right. We could go and get away and drive the van. And then she's immediately like, but I'm gonna go spy on this killer for a little bit first and get into that crazy set piece.
Keep going in further and further. Exactly. So great stuff.
Yeah. For you, Perry.
It's a 5. It's just such a pure horror movie, which is amazing when you think the fact that, Ikeda claims that he's not a fan of horror films, but it really does have everything you could want out of just like a capital G genre horror film, where it has all the cliches and it's playing the hits in a way, but it's doing it so effectively and so creatively and with such muscular technique that I really don't know how to fault it. I mean, it's just such a pure organism.
Agreed.
Yeah. No, I got to agree. Yeah, this is great. I'm really glad you showed this to us. But yeah, so if you haven't seen Evil Dead Trap, go out there, go seek it out. Go see corpses flying meat hooks and people getting grabbed out of thin air by wire strangulation, and have a good time. Get a crowd. You know, have everyone react together. You know,
it is definitely one of those. The shock per minute is pretty good.
Yeah. Pretty unbelievable. So yeah, that's going to wrap it up, I think, for Evil Dead Trap. We are going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about, maybe I'd argue maybe a little bit more of a feel bad time, and not necessarily playing the hits, trying to be a little bit more confrontational with its use of genre. We are going to be back, and we're going to be talking about celluloid nightmares. Stick around. All right, we are back, and we are talking Celluloid Nightmares, the 1988 Japanese horror film written by Shiro Umeno and directed by Hisayasu Sato. who is this will be our second time talking about Sato. We did an episode on Necromantic 2 and Splatter Naked Blood. I can't remember how many years ago now that we did that one, but both films about gory mutilation as romantic obsession in a way for anyone who's interested, and definitely a good pairing with a little bit of what we're going to be talking about here, because Sato, he is a Japanese pinku filmmaker, definitely spent more of his career than even Akita in this genre. Started there, basically made his horror films within that genre, and then continued making films in that genre until even today, still making films there. Which we didn't mention, by the way. But Perry, did you ever read about what happened to Akita?
No, I did not.
He apparently died in 2010, and they just found him turned up like in the ocean.
Oh, really?
Jesus Christ!
Which I thought was which is really fucked up actually when I read that, and I was just like, yeah. So
is there any updates at all since then that you know of?
No, but people basically are not sure if it was an accident or if it was intentional. Nobody has any idea. People do say that he was depressed, and he had always threatened that he might do something in that neighborhood apparently. But yeah, nobody is unsure. But it was just something I thought about when I went into Sato, because when I looked up Sato, because I was wondering why that guy didn't have a longer career, or maybe wasn't still making movies, because there's a lot of Japanese underground filmmakers who still get work today in their industries, and Sato is one of them, despite being maybe one of the more extreme that I've witnessed. Like, definitely the most perverted, made some of the hardest to watch just in terms of pure violence and sexual violence and gory mutilation, sort of masochistic themes that he has. I mean, really horrible scenes of rape when they do appear in his films, all used as a function in a really interesting way to tell stories of power and desire and romantic yearning amongst these kind of really fucked up characters. So like it's very interesting. Like he does have legitimate concerns about voyeurism and alienation, and he just was like, I'm gonna make horror films out of pornographic material, and kind of vice versa, like a little bit of he operated in that realm. And it's hard to recommend to anyone who isn't he wouldn't be my first filmmaker where I'm like, if you're going to try to get into extreme cinema, this is your guy. Because this is a guy who still kind of disturbs me as someone who has, seen at least a few and kind of knows what I'm getting into. But I watched a couple of his this week to kind of get into the zone. And I got to say, the one by the title I probably should have been off-put by in the first place and kind of knew what I was getting into. But I watched fucking Lolita Vibrator Torture. And I gotta say,
I've got that one on deck on my computer. Just can't wait. Oh my god!
Something to mention about Hisayasu Sato that's very funny is all his movies have at least like two titles, where there's like the pretty poetic title, and then there's the distributor title. Yes. So, for example, The Bedroom becomes Unfaithful Wife, Shameful Torture, or Secret Garden becomes Lolita Vibrator Torture.
Yes.
Or, I mean, God, what's Kyrie Erickson distributed as?
Splatter Naked Blood is a remake of a film that was just called Genuine Rape.
Well, which was also released as Lustmord or Pleasure Kill.
Oh my god. I think this one has a direct translation. It's like abnormal extreme abuse or ugly abuse. That's what it is.
Right. As well as Celluloid Nightmares and Rewind.
Yeah.
Oh my god. This is just a warning up front. This is what the territory that we are getting into. But Sato is a very interesting filmmaker, and it was cool to, kind of go through a little bit of his stuff this week in prep for it, because his films are so short. I was like, I'm going to watch a couple of them and kind of get a better feel for the guy. And I've also been doing some Charles Pinion recently. Nice. And something that kind of united them, at least in perspective, not in terms of like necessarily sensibility. I mean, obviously they both kind of liked the quality of tape a little bit, but there was a great interview I read with Pinion where, he was basically like, I was being hired to make this very erotic porno, and he was basically told I could do whatever else I wanted as long as there was 5 fuck scenes. Whatever, I don't care. You have your money, do your fuck scenes, and whatever else is around them, who fucking gives a shit? I don't give it. Like, turn it in. The guys don't even watch it.
Yeah,
you know, we just, you know, that's how the market works. So he can do his horror gestures inside of those scenes, and Pinion got in a lot of trouble the same way that I imagine Sato did at a certain point, because the horror gestures made such an impression that it actually started making the people who were buying the VHS tapes of these pornos like upset. Like they were like, I'm not horny anymore, and like, you're not delivering the product. And he's like, well, the way I saw it, this was my way of making movies and art. You know, this is, you know, this you know,
said I could do whatever I wanted.
Yeah, so there's a unique connection between those two guys, and I think that perspective where Sato was, you know, on a pure market level, he was being asked to turn in, you know, pornographic films that would, you know, for example, would appeal to someone when they went, yeah, what if a underage girl was tortured with a vibrator? You know, that's the market you're selling to. Now make a film within that, and I will say, surprisingly, maybe not even surprisingly, maybe surprisingly not even the right word, but like, I mean, surprisingly for anyone maybe unfamiliar with the genre or going into the film as just a straightforward Pinku film, like there is some actual psychological and emotional depth to a lot of the films that he makes, including the Lolita film, which had this really crazy element to it where she not just gets like the revenge punishment sort of power fantasy against the guy who is assaulting her, but she actually starts to like kind of own the abuse and kind of enjoy it and collaborate with it, and basically like becomes an artist in her own vein through it, starts taking control of it in a way. And that kind of element, I think, defines his films even more than necessarily the shock sensibility.
Yeah, so many of his films have a self-reflexive streak.
Yes.
For example, this film has, not only is there a Sato staple where it's people having sex in proximity of images of violence. Sometimes even literally their skin is lit by images of violence, where there's a classic Sato sex scene that you're going to see in like every third movie of his is two people are having sex while there's a CRT screen that's showing something gruesome, and the light from that CRT is lighting them. But in this, they even have like, there's the snuff film that kicks off the plot is discovered in a sex video booth, you know, where people go in to watch porn and masturbate. They just find this snuff film there. There's a character who's a director of violent pink films. Then there's a bunch of general, like, film and medium reflexivity stuff down to the title. But what's interesting about Sato is, he's working in this framework, but he's so married to his obsessions. I mean, now that you've seen a few, you can see that, like, he has only a couple elements that are in all of his movies, and he's constantly remixing them like a kaleidoscope.
Are you a lonely man wandering a Japanese city in a gorilla camcorder image? You might be in a Sato film. Watch out.
What's amazing is the artist, when I think of Hisayasu Sato, who I gotta say, I mentioned it before, he's one of my favorite filmmakers. You know, he's in my Mount Rushmore. And the artist he reminds you of the most isn't another filmmaker, not even like another pink filmmaker like Koji Wakamatsu or something, but J.G. Ballard, the novelist. Because not only is there like a similar fixation with like the intersection of technology, eroticism, and death, but he has a very specific set of these intrinsically linked images and obsessions, and he's just constantly reconfiguring them. So there's like every Sato movie, you're going to find at least some trace of like surveillance, video therapy, screen as two-way voyeur, Tokyo is concrete desert, sex on or in glass furnishing, medical comas, medical bandages, technology as an agent of sexual assault, ESP. And this guy, he was churning out movies. Like, he had a golden age from 1987 to 1993 where most of his like more celebrated films are made. But he made 4 movies in 1988 alongside, including Celluloid Nightmares. And they have
he was in his Ford era. He was like, I'm just cranking them.
And he's just cranking them out, but they all have the same basic building blocks, the same kind of tone of just like really sterile alienation, almost like Cronenberg in a way, where it's just this almost prosaic presentation of the
There's
film.
Some Videodrome and Crash in this for sure.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Crash is the closest thing I've seen to like a, Western equivalent to Sato film, honestly. But
sure, yeah.
Yeah, he just has this prosaic, like brutalist filming style, and he has these images he's constantly reconfiguring in, and somehow he kept being able to make them. You know, even though they are so subversive for the form they're working in.
Mm-hmm. And even though he had an extreme shock factor sensibility like built into him, like he has, I didn't check some of these out, but like he has some bestiality films, Horse and a Woman and Dog. The one that Perry mentioned, The Promiscuous Wife, Disgraceful Torture. He cast a real life cannibal murderer in that film.
Issei Sagawa.
Who was the documentary film subject of the film Cannibal, for anyone who has seen that. Which
he's very infamous.
Yeah, and I should mention that the directors of Cannibal produced one of the latest Sato films. Because the pink industry no longer exists. You know, it got destroyed by adult video. The same way that, like, nudie cuties got destroyed by hardcore porn, to make a reductive comparison. But yeah, so Sato now mostly makes kind of cheap horror films or fetish films. He hasn't made a ton, but he's still making some. But the last, like, return to form Sato was produced by those two.
Okay.
Wow. Okay, I might need to look into that because I've seen Cannibal and I thought it was a horrifying film. Listening to that man speak for as long as he speaks on camera. In that film.
If you want to see him do visual puns, he does visual puns in the bedroom where they literally have him eating ass as like a joke. Like, hey, he's a cannibal. Get it?
Oh my god!
This guy's king of bad taste. That's kind of impressive.
It's evil.
Yeah, that's
Sato's fucking
evil.
crazy. I mean, my personal, and we'll get into the film soon because you'll have to know the reason we're setting this up is because this does fit very snugly into so much of what he did for his overall career and everything like that. But one of the ones that really stood out to me watching this week was Muscle.
Oh yeah.
I need to
which
watch
is which is I think for a lot of people considered the first like gay pink film, I guess, or like is that true? That's what I saw people saying.
I don't know if it's the first, but I think it's certainly the most infamous. I mean, when people think of gay pink in terms of like Western pink fan circles, I can't speak to its reception in Japan, but I mean, that's the one people usually go to.
Well, it's definitely a love letter to the sculpted male form in those early images of the bodybuilders, and then plus it's a huge homage, or at least it constantly cites Cello director Pier Pasolini as well. And yeah, that was just great. Like practically, it basically just is a straightforward romance film about a sadomasochistic bodybuilder. And it is the closest I've seen to him just making like a straight up romance movie. But like the dude's like obsessed with, he cuts off his own lover's arm and keeps it preserved in a jar. And then, tries to hunt him down to make up for doing that act of violence to him. A friend of the pod, Rocky, called it essential Mishima-core, which I thought was basically the best way of describing that film. Like it has the BDSM, the power, the queerness, the bodybuilding. Like it's all there.
He has 5 gay movies. And that was, my entry to Sato as a fan of queer cinema, is I watched his movie Bondage Ecstasy, and I was like, what the fuck is this? Because it's just this bizarre movie kind of playing on Kafka's Metamorphosis and that Chinese fable of the guy who dreams he's a butterfly and then wakes up, it's like, oh, am I a butterfly dreaming I'm a man now? Or am I a man who dreamt I was a butterfly? But through like S&M porn. And his gay movies are usually a lot more tender than his heterosexual movies, which not to say that his gay movies aren't pretty savage. I mean, he has one called Hunter's Sense of Touch, which I think is his best.
I would argue Muscle was like the most that I've watched. I question saying the word accessible in the context of this filmmaker in general, but it is like the one where I was like, oh, that's kind of sweet.
Yeah, you can show it to people.
Yeah. Which is not typically the response I get from his films, like even something like Splatter Naked Blood, which is all about, turning up, which I mean does have an emotional element where like the scientist is experiencing a traumatic loss and trying to create this drug that will remove the pain and instead replace it with happiness or pleasure, and accidentally makes a drug that everyone goes that turns pain into pleasure. So people start, mutilating themselves and popping their own eyeballs with forks and chopping off their own genitals and eating them and all kinds of crazy stuff.
All of his films deal with a kind of like emotional deadness, or characters who have this complete isolation or strong emotional ambivalence. And usually that's married to technology. And that's something that this film deals with a lot, is this idea of like,
oh yeah,
characters who exist in a technological society, and because of that, they're all their own islands. You know, they cannot really connect with anyone else. Something I want to mention here is there's this movement of Japanese speculative fiction around this era that's commonly called like denpa, and which translates roughly to like electromagnetic wave. And basically there was a crime in 1981 where a guy stabbed 4 people, and he said that he was told to do it by messages transmitted in radio waves. And after that, there's a lot.
I thought you were going to say from a psychic cactus, and I was like, it's coming full circle.
No, but through radio waves. And so there's a lot of art post that just deals with technological isolation that is put under that umbrella. Like people put Pulse or Cure under that umbrella. People put Sato under that umbrella. The anime serial experiments.
Speaking of next week, anyone listening, Pulse.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the rule breakers. We had to.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a lot of Japanese speculative art around the end of the 20th century and the start of the 21st, just about.
Oh yeah, I mean, you can definitely feel that in this, but also mixed in with like, you know, like a little bit of an attempt at, you know, I got a lot of Videodrome and a lot of Peeping Tom in this one, I will say, from the like opening, you know, just like from the concept of the film, which weirdly enough, because it's doled out in this kind of atmospheric, mysterious element, I'll admit I was kind of confused for about half the movie or so. And it's only a 60-minute movie, and I was confused for large portions of it where I was kind of like, I don't know exactly who everybody is, but let me know if I get anything wrong here, Perry. So we've got
I will be of no help. This was my second time watching it, and I was like, yeah, I kind of know what happens in it.
I think I get it. I think we've got a killer or killers, which we're going to get to by the end, with backgrounds in filmmaking or broadcasting, who are killing people with a camera that literally has a knife poke out of it. It's not just like the Peeping Tom where he kills people with like the tripod points or whatever. This is a knife inside a lens, talking about how unsettled and funny this guy likes to be.
Although eventually
at times.
we will see a tripod kill.
We will also see a straight up, almost what feels like a reference to Peeping Tom, basically. And then, so they are shooting tapes of them basically, you know, like raping and torturing and dismembering women for the underground extreme video market, which is how we get introduced to this sort of like female private investigator played by Sato Regular, actually, because I watched a couple. I was like, I've seen this girl a couple times, and apparently a co-writer with him a couple times.
Kiyomi Ito.
Yep.
Kiyomi Ito, and she's working as sort of like a private investigator, but has a more sort of personal history we'll once again get into by the end of the film. And she is kind of hot on the trail of the makers of these tapes for these personal reasons, and ends up gravitating towards also this young boy named Akira, who works at the sex booth, as Perry mentioned, and who finds one of the tapes while cleaning up one day, and basically becomes very Videodrome style, in my opinion. He becomes kind of like entranced and like obsessed by the tape and this, you know, sort of underworld he's discovering to a kind of unhealthy degree. And I would say, honestly, it kind of makes all 3 of these batches of characters kind of like a lead of the film. Like it really doesn't feel like we're grounded. Like, I guess you could probably argue that the PI is the grounding because she's in the first scene and the last scene of the film in a way. But like, because of the limited runtime, it feels like we get just as much time kind of spent with the Mr. Spielberg of the violent pinkus and also the young boys as well. So the first thing that popped into my head while I was watching this was just the haziness of it all. Like, it did feel kind of disorienting in a way that I found very effective. But when we were mentioning an Evil Dead Trap, where both formats of cinematography kind of are more discernible, but still utilized in kind of a way that they fuse together. This one just seems to be
it goes back and forth so often, I found that it creates like a, excuse me, disorienting kind of effect, a very hazy effect. Like you're not quite sure what you're looking at sometimes. Even in the first like 5 minutes.
And then you squint your eyes and you're like, oh, I'm watching a murder rape snuff film. Okay.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And then it'll cut from that to somebody actually watching it on their television, and then somebody making one of their own on like their own camera. And like there's just,
and then a dismembered arm holding the tape in the middle of an abandoned city parking lot inside of a rotten fridge.
Right next to a like Greco-Roman bust.
Yes.
Yeah. Like the first 5 minutes of this, it starts with the VHS rape murder sequence, and then you go into this like kind of this spin that where the camera actually gets more modern, but it's just capturing the camera that was capturing the VHS sequence, and then it goes to the city that you guys were mentioning, where it shows like the hand holding the tape in the fridge, which is I
almost
kind
forgot
of
about that shot of the camera that you mentioned. That's so important,
right? And the that scene too, where the camera's kind of leading up to the fridge holding the hand. It's a better looking footage than the VHS stuff or the home video stuff, but it still kind of has this strange way that it's almost got like a POV quality to it, so you're still not quite sure what part of the film that you're at. And then it goes into like a couple I think watching the tape or watching a news about the murder, and then they end up having like softcore porn scene, a softcore porn scene. So there's just so much that happens in this first 5 to 10 minutes that's going to kind of spell out the rest of the way that he formats his movies, it seems. So I think my confusion when it came to the plot sometimes was just all the haziness.
Yeah, I mean, like once the reveals are made, I feel like in retrospect, I kind of understood a little bit more, because I was kind of like, it is weird that this like private investigator is watching these tapes and getting turned on by these tapes in a way, or like has them while they're having sex. And it is worth noting too, more so than Evil Dead Trap, this one is just straight up like kind of like when it gets into the sex scenes, it's pink film. Like it's just a softcore. Like he does include the obligatory 5 fuck scenes that I was mentioning before. Like they are just in here, and they are just extended, sort of meant to be erotic sex scenes.
And they're more explicit.
But what's interesting is,
I'm not sure how much they are meant to be erotic. Like, it's not like he's shooting them intentionally unerotically or anything, but he shoots them with the same visual language everything else is shot. Which is, again,
it's definitely
very cold,
off-putting. Still,
very static. And again, I mean, that first sex scene is lit by the violence from the snuff film.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And then you have like.
And her asking to get handcuffed, which is like a dark detail, which we find out about later.
And there's, of course, the like the oral sex in pink films is they suck on bulges and underwear. Mm-hmm. But having that in Sato films almost feels fitting, like this weird neurotic type of sex.
Like every sex scene has this some strange dynamic. Like the first one is where, you know, they just watch the tape and then they decide to have sex. The second one, I believe, is the incestuous relationship with the camera guy and the brother or the sister. The third one is kind of this like power
which
dynamic.
Is funny. She's literally like, let's just commit incest.
Then just go at it.
Very, like,
and make the loudest, wettest kissing noises ever.
Yeah,
horrible.
The sex scenes are pretty explicit as much as they can be. And then the third one, I believe, is like a more power dynamic thing where it's the big director. I think his name is it Cross or something like that. I have it written down, but regardless, and his assistant, I believe, that gets him like the models. So there's this.
And star of his his very famous pink film that everyone knows because it's like the one about like what about if a bug like lived inside of a woman and then it like writhed around in torture and it pleasured her and then it like
and then they do a lover suicide together, her and this they call him Mr. Spielberg.
Right.
Which is great.
The Spielberg of the underground.
He's the Spielberg of pink films.
Yeah. and even before that sex scene between the star and him, he like smacks her and kicks out another model and stuff. So there's definitely these constant strange dynamics to every sex scene, even though the sex scenes themselves are filmed as if you're just supposed to watch like two good-looking people rub up against each other. There's always this strange dynamic underlying it.
Absolutely. Well, because he makes everyone's kind of fetishes like quite clear and the very sort of like dark place that they might have come from. Mm-hmm. And then he also has like a fatalism to it. Like when we find out that movie is about that bug escaping her body because he's rid the round enough that he finally gets out. But then he finds out that he can't live outside her body, which is why they do the suicide pact or the suicide lover sort of element to it. And like that feels honestly like even what his sex scenes are like. And even if you start getting into like the rhythm of it, it feels like he immediately like kind of cuts you off at the moment when, like even that first sex scene, which is like maybe where someone could be like, oh, I see, this is a porn film. It's immediately cut to this disorienting, steely blue cityscape image, followed by an overhead dolly of the men jacking off in the filthy sex booths.
Yeah.
And you're immediately like, oh, well, this is just gross. And then it's where you get the first reality of Akira, who is going to each booth and he's literally like cleaning out like the tissues and shit like that. And you're just like, oh my God.
Hold on to the garbage bag because he's just like, oh, this is absolutely disgusting. Yeah,
and like that's a detail seedy. That like Pinion would get, as he was saying, like he'd get in trouble for. Like that's exactly the kind of thing where you're just like, okay, so you cut away from the sex scene to show a dude like cleaning up tissues at a sex booth. Like that's a very off-putting image to immediately smash cut to after a scene like that.
I mean, it's just a really like dark joke to put in your saying that people are going to watch like it's porno, right? I mean, like the way these films were distributed.
The second he got a man jacking off, show him a man jacking off in the most disgusting way possible.
Like, people didn't come to Pink Films as like, oh, the new Hisayasu Sato's out, I got to catch that in theaters,
Not like us.
These would just play on, these just play on double bills in their original context, and I just cannot imagine seeing a Sato film for the first time. Or ever, I guess, just thinking like, I'm just going to watch a normal porno. I'm done with work for today. I'm going to go to the theater. I'm going to see something. Like,
I'm going to go see a dirty movie.
Yeah.
Just, get some stress relief.
That's another mark on like the self-reflexive streak. Or just, I mean, there's general medium reflexivity in it too. Because, of course, again, like Evil Dead Traps, all the images of screens and eyeballs, this really has, like, the violating camera. And there's an incredible shot where the knife coming out of the camera is pressed up against an eyeball. Yeah. There's all the really blatant cribs from, Videodrome and Peeping Tom and people talking about Spielberg. And there are bits where they discuss, like, underground video films from America, which are essentially, like, political snuff films. They talk about the people in America film KKK lynchings and like they sell these tapes.
I laughed when she mentioned Lolita films because I was like, dude, you made a... And no, he didn't make exactly one, but I was like, it was funny that he had one that was titled that. And it was very funny to watch that in preparation for then a character who explicitly like, says that what a horrible thing it is for someone to, make a film like that. And it creates this deliberate whiplash effect with it where he's indulging in the voyeurism and, in characters who, turn to their screens for pleasure and for even, in his case, for the transgressive sort of like transmission power of it, which is the most Videodrome aspect of it for me, where it's like, there is literally employees of TV stations who are here, like, they're, what's the line the director gets at one point where it was like, it's different than when I was at the TV station because this is real. This is he's kind of an artiste. He's creating the real thing. He's having a real effect, and honestly, the viewers are telling him that. They're saying, the one about the bug and the girl kind of fucked me up, and it's pretty artsy. It's kind of a masterpiece when you think about it, which is the way we're going to be talking about this. So
and also, I mean, the whole last like 15 minutes take place in this chamber where there's a woman really tied up, but there's also, she's being filmed and all the screens around her show her being filmed. Yeah. And it's like the Evil Dead Trap thing where it's like, oh, well, this is happening on TV. It's not. Well, that's even a line from this movie, right? Where it's like, oh, that's just a video. That's not real.
It is, yeah, because the sister who the Akira is having an incestuous relationship with, she becomes a bit concerned when he starts going back to his apartment every day and just watching this tape over and over again. He's saying that he's watching it because I think it's real. Like, I think that she might have actually been hurt. She might have been killed. And I believe, and maybe you guys once again will, because if we do want to at some point get into the sort of spoiler territory, it is at one point revealed that one of these rape tapes was made about the private investigator woman who's looking into this, which is why she is looking into this community to, a little bit. She sounds like she was trying to escape it because she got facial reconstruction surgery or something. And she actually changed the way that she looked. Yeah. In order to, and because she was a TV newscaster before, which actually unites the two films as well, where the lead of the film who is attacked is a TV newscaster. But there's this element to it where why do I already forget where I was going with this?
Was it what the director has to say about her having the reconstruction? Because I thought that was pretty interesting. Him almost looking at it as this masterful sequel or something like that.
Yeah, that was pretty dark. But I think I was leading into the element of I think we're meant to believe that in the opening scene, that's the tape she's watching, right? She's watching her own attack. Yeah. And then that tape is misplaced at the sex booth and we're not sure who by. And so that's the tape that he is watching. And so that's why the kid kind of becomes obsessed, because he starts forming a relationship with this private investigator. And it turns out it is the woman who was being assaulted in the film and everything like that. So that to me was what I eventually kind of got out of it. But again, it was a little confusing journey in order to get there. But the more hypnotic element of the film started to make more sense to me when I was like, this guy is kind of becoming obsessed with this woman in that kind of peeping Tom Hitchcockian kind of fashion that he's watching on this screen. And that's when the sister is like, dude, you're kind of just watching this fucked up tape over and over again, even though, I think it's fake. It's not real.
Yeah. And I believe that the young boy at one point too, he becomes kind of like a red herring for a little bit because of his obsession. I think that she starts to accuse him of being the possible killer, because there's even these kind of more unpurposely disorienting scenes where she starts to get chased by a car that almost seems like it hits her, but then it cuts away to her being in a room and she's okay. So it's just a scare.
Talk about fear of modern technology, literally car jump scares,
Yeah. So I did kind of like that, where it starts to get honestly, this movie feels, the word is hazy, cloudy, disorienting, and purposely so. It can be a little frustrating in that sense sometimes. At least it was for me in this first go, but it leads to this kind of horrifying rabbit hole that you just keep diving into deeper and deeper. So it does have a cool effect to it.
Well, I mean, even the way that those images, because they are I think as Jamie's putting it, they're done in this kind of experimental use of analog video. And I mean, as with all Sato films, as you'll see, there are these just guerrilla shots of the cityscapes and people just looking up at them and being overwhelmed by them, and the technological elements and stuff like that. But when those images even start to come to life for him, like that incredible shot where it almost seems like the kid thinks he's in the tape or something, and we actually just go to the tape footage, the night it was shot, where you get the dude with the camcorder with the POV knife sticking out of it, grabbing her arm and scaring her, and this very low angle, the camera very low angle pushing away as this creepy figure is standing there. And the camera as a killing tool, as we mentioned, it has origins in something like Peeping Tom, but I also thought a little bit about Larry Cohen's special effects. Yeah. Especially that one scene with the director in his sunglasses on the Ruffy set, standing next to the tripod and stuff like that. Just how cool he kind of sees of himself as an artist, which you do feel is kind of Sato, being kind of poking fun at maybe other filmmakers, but also maybe himself a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I don't know. There was a strange hypnotic quality to just some of the imagery that he picks that did start to build for me, and the gross out images, the under the fingernail blade part that reminded me of that part that always makes me cringe in Fire Walk with Me when they go to find that message under her nail. That's what it kind of reminded me of. But
so real
with Jamie
too in that footage, unbelievably real. It really disturbed me. To be
and Jamie mentioned it off recording, but the maggots in the noodles.
Oh yeah,
fuck you.
That fusion. Not only does he fuse the two kind of cinematography formats together, but the constant fusion of just like sex and absolutely disgusting death imagery is constant.
Yeah.
And he has like in that scene specifically, he kind of sets you up for like if it's going to be somehow a food softcore porn thing where she's like slowly opening her legs and you see her underwear and then you see kind of like her lips come together and her
Tampopo this is not.
Yeah. And then all of a sudden
nope.
she looks down and sees the maggots and like throws up, and it's just this constant fusion of the two things that are just disgusting, and you can't look away.
The version of it in the film that is most bracing for me is near the climax when a chest is cut open with a blade and then a heel is stuck into the wound, like a high heel.
Oh,
and that's just such a awful image. I mean, it's not as abstract as the maggots and the spread legs, but it's like there's something to the raw power of how literal it is.
There's also something about the way that he does most of the voyeurism in this, which is to say, like, a lot of it usually what you see is from a distance, and this is just incredibly close up. It's always someone being absolutely terrified by what they're seeing. It's super bright because they're using that, crappy overly lit camera light, and so there's just something ugly about those images as well, uglier than just the violence itself, just the way they look. And I loved that too. Like it's not even just when they get to the, the torture chamber thing, but it's the stuff on the, like there's one shot where I think it's before they take them to the chamber, and it's just a very overly bright light in on a dark street with some girl like next to a wall or something like that, and she's screaming. It's just it's terrifying stuff, but. He really did think about how it looks, even if it's ugly as sin.
Yeah, I mean, eventually all of this leads to the big sort of kidnapping and torture and murder sequence that happens in this, sort of director's torture chamber, where I think is meant to be the reveal that the actress, that the lingerie'd actress that the director has a sex scene with, is actually involved. And she's kind of the lead in his films because she's also helping him like find girls, and, maybe is just as into it as kind of he is during. Which is, I think, meant to be kind of like the shocking moment when, like the private investigator wakes up and she's being stripped in front of a wall of TV screens where she can basically watch herself die because all the cameras are put on her, and have her photographs taken, and basically also happening too, because this scene, it happens right after the part where the brother just objectified the sister who he was shooting test footage to be like, hey sister, why don't you be in one of this director's films? He's Mr. Spielberg of the Pink films. And then he finds out that the test camera has the killer's knife in it, which freaks his sister out. And he's kind of like, whose camera was this? Which
ends up being kind of like the convincing factor for when he shows the one girl, because she's like, wow, she can act, because she can't see the knife, and the sudden because the footage is just she's dancing, she's happy, she's laughing, and then all of a sudden just terrified and crumbled to the ground, and and so that contrast is very interesting.
Well, and it captures his own intrigue with it, because in this final sequence, when when she is like held in this sort of like torture chamber, and the sex booth employee Akira is like out kind of looking for her, there's this quality where she's chained up. She's like sliced open. She's drugged with what looks like the needle from Reanimator. It's like a cartoonishly huge needle.
It's a big deal.
As Perry put it, she has her chest stomped on and punctured by a heel. Because if the director is the killer, then the actress from the Bug film is now in on it. And honestly, the BDSM quality just reminded me of the BDSM subplot in Muscle, with the girls the guys all getting stomped on.
Looking forward to that.
But as this all pulls away, you just get like more reveal of this crazy layer with all the analog equipment and like the projector screens. And you get Akira eventually breaking in and like killing the actress with the camera brutally and like beating her to death, and the knife stabbing her and gushing blood all over him. This is like the Japanese gore film, literally Peeping Tom scene when he decides he's going to kill someone with the camera.
And this is directly after they have sex. I believe that like lead actress for Cross and
oh yeah, I forgot he fit one of his 5 fuck scenes in there.
I forgot. We forgot about that one.
Yeah,
right before the gruesome tripod murder.
Yes. Yeah, well, because he had to have one lesbian scene.
Yeah,
and he was like, okay, we got it, we satisfied it. Now watch her get murdered to death with a tripod, and then watch this kid basically like go fucking crazy. Because I think the director comes in at one point, who's revealed to be like the newscaster who essentially made the rape videotape the first time of the private detective woman. And as I mentioned, she got like facial surgery and basically changed her life and found herself in their path again by kind of like circumstance. And yeah, that line that you were talking about, Jamie, where he just calls her like a great creation or production. And like, he's like, yeah, you changed the way that you look. Now we can make a really great sequel with you, which triggers the kid to go up and kill him with the knife camera as well. Everyone dies by knife camera in this finale, by the way.
Yeah, and doesn't this one part kind of confused me? Maybe it was Kiyomi, but when there's a second time where he goes up and it's a girl that stabs him with a knife, and is that Kiyomi? Because it looked like she was in a different dress, but that could have been because they switched her out during the whole torture sequence as well. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
I think because you're talking about when the kid gets killed.
Well, it's is it? Maybe that's what I'm getting confused with. I might be getting Cross confused with the Cross kill confused with the kid kill. Yeah, that's probably what it is.
Okay, yeah, because the kid kills Cross, and then they kind of think that they're safe, but then the kid, based on my interpretation, he's become so obsessed with this footage and this form of art, and he has now basically taken the place of the director killer, and he basically looks like he's fucking crazed, and that he's going to go after her next because he's found the girl in the videotape he was obsessed with, and he basically looks like he's about to make the sequel himself in that moment. So she has to kill him. Yeah, and she stabs him to death, and it's gushing blood all over her face, and there is like a little bit of like a she has like a little bit of a smile to her.
Oh yeah,
and
she's
then you get that really
taking that in when she gets all that blood covered with her. There is kind of a. It's slight, but there feels like there's a satisfaction there.
There is a cycle of traumatic violence taking place here, and which does result in a pretty kind of lyrical final image where, she literally, it's random images of the city. And I think it's meant to be like the end of her original tape, maybe, or something like that, where she points the camera at herself, which I was guessing was how she had the tape at the beginning, because she still just had the tape the whole time. And when she points the camera at herself, it can't even bear to look at her anymore. So it starts to blur, and then the screen just straight up like breaks. Yeah. Which is like a crazy, like weird meta moment.
And she screams, and you get this really strange close up of an eye, and then it's just credits. And what's cool too about the credits is it's kind of like stuttered, like as if it's frame by frame as they go up. I just like
it's like a digital scroll.
Yeah, it's really cool. And a huge, like, especially in this last 5-10 minutes, an incredible fusion of pretty much all of his ideas he's using when it comes to cinematography just put together here. It's pretty incredible. It's disorienting, but it is very effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of sat in my brain longer than I, thought it would, because when my first visceral reaction to watching it is I was going, do you know what? This isn't quite as disturbing or upsetting as I expected, just because I had just watched Lolita, Vibrator Torture #1, but even Splatter Naked Blood, I was like, this doesn't have like someone chopping off their genitals and eating them and being like, ooh, delicious, so I wasn't quite as like offended by this movie in terms of sensibility, and then the character subjectivity and obsession of it just didn't quite click for me in the early elements, and it kind of clicked for me after, when I started really thinking about the movie and started like seeing his preoccupations and how they kind of fit in. Whereas with Muscle, I was kind of intrigued on like a romantic level with that film, with the characters and the things that. So this one does kind of stand out as it feels like the ultimate Sato commentating on the Sato project film in a way is what it. So looking at it on that level, kind of in retrospect. Because that's something to say that this I didn't have like a negative reaction to the film by any means. I just definitely in the middle of watching it, I was kind of like, oh, there's like this almost has like a, sort of mystery crime film quality to it that I've never really seen him do. And it is kind of like a basic reveal to it. But I don't know. This one has kind of sat in my mind, just all of the, as Perry was putting it, like the obsession with the technology, the almost weird Hitchcockian element where he's like obsessed with this rape victim on this tape who turns out to be the girl who is the detective in a way. Like, I don't know, like it does have some things to really chew on, and doing the director as the killer that we've talked about, definitely a kind of film that we really enjoy on the show. And yeah, I don't know, the video dreamscape and the off-putting nature of Sato in general, I would say that this kind of ended up, I'll say on first watch, this ended up in kind of like the lower 4 territory for me if we're pivoting towards the reductive rating round. But I do want to go back to it because it was just one of those things where my immediate impression was like, oh, I guess that's what this is. And after the fact, it's haunted a little bit. I'll say it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think right now I'm gonna go with it's like a very strong 3, just because I still would like this conversation has definitely cleared up a few things for me here. It's just there is like I said, a haziness to the film that I do like. I just found myself a little detached to the storyline because of it. But I think with a rewatch, I feel like it would probably get there. So you know me, I just like to actually do that before I commit. So I'd still highly recommend it if this is the type of thing that you're into, and if you're following the show, you probably are. But yeah, like for both films, a forewarning that they are very explicit, and just you're gonna feel a little filthy, But Sato he does have a really good control of the camera. I think he's got some really great ideas. Surprisingly, the sex stuff is like the least. It seems like he considered that the less than everything else when it came to like the shot setups and stuff. There is kind of like Perry said, kind of a static nature to the sex scenes, which given the context,
he found a way to shock you and slap you on the wrist for getting into it in any way by immediately cutting from the sex to a bunch of filthy dudes jacking off and having to clean the sex booths.
Yeah, or just having a really like kind of standard softcore porn scene, but right before it, it's the context is, hey brother, would you like to have incest? So it's just there's always something there that's kind of stopping you from really feeling any eroticism or something like that. But it's quite a journey. So yeah, I would still recommend it if this is your kind of thing.
He wouldn't be who he is without eroticism and then punishment for eroticism.
Exactly.
So.
Exactly. So yeah, that's my score.
For you, Perry.
I'm gonna give this one a 4. The reason why I love it, but I admit I've seen enough. I've seen like 18, 19 Sato movies at this point, and I kind of have developed
That's so many, dude. Are you okay? We need to have a talk.
He's the greatest. He's the best. But I've kind of developed like a Sato curve in my head because of that. And I love this movie, and I love everything it's doing, but it just... Maybe that's not fair, though. Maybe I'll just give it a 5 because I do think it is a 5. But yeah, fuck it. Yeah, you know what? It's a 5. It's a great movie by the greatest director of all time.
Let's go.
Make another one of his bangers.
That's killer.
Yeah. Well, I'll say I do see myself coming back to this one, which is not something I can say about Lolita vibrator torture, which is
Yeah, there is an intrigue to this one, I gotta say. It feels like even for an hour that you could miss a lot, and that's it is oddly dense. I would say.
Yeah, well, and the fact that we were making comparisons to Videodrome and Crash, and they kind of feel like some of the interest that he had, but he was just doing it in the production model that was offered to him, right? Like you feel like if he had that he could have explored these ideas. He could have went in like a similar vein if he had more money or a different market that he was presenting to. But also, I don't know that for sure. Maybe he loved this market. Maybe he thought this was the greatest thing ever. Maybe he loved the contradiction of it as well, and that it would piss people off.
I'm looking at a couple here. Muscle is one that I'm absolutely going to get to. I already downloaded it because you linked us up earlier, Josh. But this one called Rampo Noir looks really interesting from 2005.
Yeah, that's an anthology. But
I see,
he has a really good segment in it.
Okay, cool.
He adapts, if I can go on a spiel for a second, he adapts this story called The Caterpillar, which is about a man who comes home from the Japanese-Russian War horribly mutilated. He has no tongue, no eye. No, he has a tongue, but he doesn't have any eyes. He doesn't have any limbs. And he just wants his wife to have sex with him all the time. And his wife basically gets goes between like pitying him and being disgusted by him, and is the perfect literary material for a Sato film. Although the rest of the movie is not quite as good.
Oh, okay. Is he? You'd say that his part's the highlight?
Yeah, his part's highlight. The Jisoji is pretty good too.
Okay, cool.
Is there any one that you would recommend, Perry, for people trying to get into the deeper cuts? Maybe.
Hunter's Sense of Touch is my favorite. Where a lot of his movies are, they're riffing on other popular genre films, like we've mentioned Videodrome, Peeping Tom. A couple of his movies have pretty clear The Conversation DNA, but Hunter's Sense of Touch is his cruising.
Oh, wow.
Cool.
Okay. Sold.
Exactly. That's all you need. It's fantastic.
Oh, yeah. I only got a couple of mutuals, but both of them, one of them 5s it and one of them 4s it, so looks highly recommended there.
Yeah,
in 60 minutes,
there we go.
Let's go. Yeah, I'm down.
They're all 60 minutes because they played in double bills where you sat there for 2 hours.
Oh,
so they were like, there you go. You get 2 of them. Now,
beautiful.
The question is, Perry, have you seen Nay Means Yes?
I have not seen Nay Means Yes.
I cannot find if it lives up to that title or not, Danny, and I'm too terrified to hit play.
I admit I've seen enough Joe D'Amato movies where I'm not in a rush to watch other movies where people have sex with horses. I've sort of gotten my fill. But
he's the best at it. We're gonna just let him do it.
No, look, anyone who makes Emmanuel in America owns horse sex on film,
Yeah.
No one else
Eat
can
your
really
heart out,
touch it.
Kevin Smith. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't mention this aside. I watched Emmanuel in America for the first time like a month ago, and I half considered being like, Josh, we gotta swap out one of these movies and watch Emmanuel in America.
Oh my God.
If you want to see another really disgusting snuff film erotic ? Movie, that's my third bonus pick here.
That'll be that could be for next year.
Yeah, exactly.
Prepare your worst again next year, Perry.
There you go. But well, I think that is going to wrap it up for Celluloid Nightmares and for this week's episode. Once again, that was. Oh my God, why am I... This always happens to me at the end of an episode.
Evil Dead Trap?
That's right. That was the 1988 snuff film double feature of Evil Dead Trap and Celluloid Nightmares. Thanks so much, Perry, for joining us and for bringing these films with you. If you've got anything to plug while you're here, what's going on in Perry World? Any new writing coming out or anything?
So... I have a writer's website now, finally, which is perryruhland.com, PERRYRUHLAND.com, and that has a list of all my publications and films, has links to my movies. You can watch Sungazer through there. You can find links to some of my stories published online. I just
watch Sungazer.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Pretty cool movie. I just had the story called Amusement, published in this journal, Chthonic Matter Quarterly, which is about a town which succumbs to an architectural virus that turns it into an amusement park. And I think by the time this episode goes up, I'll be allowed to say that I have my story, The Flytrap Garden, coming out in this journal, Vestarian, which is a fantastic journal, and there's a story I'm very proud of. And one last thing, if I may. If you like the sort of erotic, grotesque scuzz in these movies or movies like them, I have a poetry collection called Torture Gardens, which is hopefully in this vein, that you can purchase through my itch.io page.
Awesome.
Let's go. Go check all those out for sure. For our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time where we are going to be doing your patron voted episode where we let you guys break the rules because we liked the double feature enough. We're going to be talking about Kiyoshi Kurosawa's Pulse, staying in the realm of Japanese technological horror. And that film is going to be paired with Olivier Assayas's Demon Lover, which, believe it or not, I have not seen.
It's good. That's I'm glad we could fit this one in because this is a good bridge between Evil Dead and Demon Lover.
Yeah.
Yep.
Totally.
Yeah, we're gonna have some fucked up weeks on this show coming up, which is gonna be funny because like that's next week exclusively on the Patreon for anyone interested. But in 2 weeks' time, we're kind of going back to the the more easily accessible horror and scuzz because we're gonna be talking about somehow two films that I've never seen. I think I caught the first one when I was like a kid, but I don't remember it that well. We're gonna be talking about the Chud films.
Okay.
Hell yeah!
I've heard of these, but I don't think I've seen either.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about Chud and Chud 2 with a special guest who like really likes those films and wanted to talk about them with us. So, for anyone who's the Chud super fans, we are going to have a Chud fest in 2 weeks time over on the main feed. But yeah, I think that once again wraps it up for everything this week. Thanks so much for listening and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy, everybody.
Keep it sleazy.